Thank you. The recording is in progress. So I just stated the problems that arise with regards to missing persons. That includes, I'm just going to mute whoever their mic is on. Okay, we say these problems usually arise when there is an estate which must be administered, or when those people that want to inherit, they really want to inherit like then there, or whenever the deceased is married and then the other person probably has found another love of their lives and they want to move on. So in respect of the situation in which the estate of the missing person must be administered, an application can be made to the High Court. I think this is part of your assignment. I might have read something like that. So you can take note of that. So an application can be made to the High Court for the appointment of a curator bonus. I remember I spoke to you guys with regards to the curators and their roles. I think it was in the beginning of this session when we were talking about mental, I think it was mental illness and children and stuff like that. So an application can be made to the High Court for the appointment of a curator bonus. So in this case, the curator bonus will look after the patrimonial interest of the missing person. So this person that will be appointed is going to be a very neutral person. This person will have nothing to do with the rest of the family, but this person will have anything to do with the interest of the missing person. So the application must be made to the High Court for an order that the missing person is presumed to be dead. So the order, so first of all, before we confuse one another, you must take note that the fact that a court has, if the court does provide that presumption of death order, it does not mean that the person is dead. You must not confuse the two. It's a presumption that that person might be dead, but the court will not issue an order that says this person is dead if they don't have evidence. Like we said, there's a direct evidence and then there's a death certificate. Without that, the court does not declare the person dead. They simply presume to say this person is presumably dead. So an order of the presumption of death by the court can take on two forms. These will include common law or statutory provisions. The statutory procedure is an alternative procedure which can be used to obtain an order of presumption of death in cases in which a person died of unnatural causes. So, and the statutory procedure does not, however, exclude the common law procedure, which I mentioned above. And any interested person can approach the court in terms of the common law procedure. So now we will talk about the presumption of death according to common law. So any person that has interest in Thabang's estate, or any person who has an interest in the person that they want to presume the other person dead. So let's say now I have so much inheritance, and then Fifi knows that she's on my will, and then she is like, I want that money, and Thabang is dead, and I need that money. So Fifi needs to go to the High Court in the area that I lived at the time of my disappearance. and apply for an order of presumption of death in respect of Tabang. So Fifi must now convince the court on a balance of probabilities that Tabang is indeed dead. So because she is the one that wants to convince, she is the one that wants to inherit, or she is the one that wants to get these things that I left behind. I don't know where I lost you, Janice. Is it, please tell me where I lost you. You can put on your mic.
Sorry for that. I just missed you. You said that anyone can approach the High Court where the person disappeared. Is that correct?
Any person, so it's anyone who has interest in the death of that, in the death of that missing person. So let's say if you feel that now, it's usually people who have certain interest, possibly beneficial interest.
Okay, but now what I'm going to ask is that, say example, the person has passed on in Johannesburg, but the person is from Cape Town. So, and the husband wants to remarry again. So does he approach Cape Town or does he approach the Joburg High Court where the person disappeared?
So okay. So first of all, you said passed on. So we are not dealing with a dead person, but we want the court to presume that person to be dead. Let's correct that first. So
yeah, sorry for that. Missing person. Sorry.
Yes. So the court that you have to apply in is in the area where the missing person lived at the time of disappearance. So that is, it has to be the jurisdiction of the person where the person lived. So let's say I'm from Cape Town, but I live, for the purposes of law, I live in Johannesburg, right? So the application, you're going to make it at the High Court in Johannesburg. Is that clear, Janice?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone has a question? The High Court where the missing person is domiciled? Yes, that's correct, Gavin. Does anybody has a question before we move on? Okay, I will take that as a no. So I was still explaining the scenario whereby the person who has interest in my death can approach the High Court and apply for the presumption of death. And like I said, that is usually people who have interest on whatever that I have left behind, or if I left behind a wife, that person maybe might have found another soulmate and they just want to close that chapter and move on. So the onus or the burden of proof is within that person that is trying to benefit or has something to do to prove to the court that I am more dead than alive. So with regards to our law, so they say here it was uncertain whether South African law would follow English law. So in English law, please, you can just underline that in English law, a person is presumed dead if he or she is missing for an uninterrupted period of 7 years, and it appears that there are persons or people that would probably have heard from that missing person during this period. Please note, this is according to English law. if the person has been missing for an uninterrupted period of 7 years, and it's clear that there are other people. Let's say now I have friends, Faith is my friend, DK Wilbert is my friend, Dumi is my friend, and then I always communicate with these people every day, and then they haven't heard from me from 7 years. According to English law, after that 7 years, then the English law, they will presume that I am indeed presumably dead. And the other situation is when such persons did not hear, in fact, anything from the missing person, and any reasonable inquiries with this regard to the missing person delivered no results. So when they say reasonable here, it usually in English law, they will be talking about, let's say Thabang has been missing for 7 years and or more, according to English law. And then there is people that I always contact every day, maybe via WhatsApp, via phone calls, via emails, and they haven't heard from me. And then when we talk about reasonable inquiries, we're talking about these people have tried to reach out to me. They know that Thabang listens to YFM. They have put out some ads on YFM or 947. They have printed some newspaper articles to find out my whereabouts, to see if I can be able to come back. And during that time, there is no results to whatever that the efforts that they're doing. So now we will go on to the factors that are considered by the court before they can issue the order of presumption of death. So there is a certain factors, and then these factors, they depend on facts. So whatever facts that you bring to court, now that Dumi has an interest in Thabang's estate and says, okay, I do have proof that Thabang is more dead than alive, and then he approaches this court, the High Court, with facts. So an order of presumption of death is not linked to any time period. This is in South Africa now. According to South African law, there is no time period that will push the court to decide as to making an order. You can go to court and be like, Thabang has been missing for 30 years and he is not back. He should be back by now. Chances are he is dead. So Mr. Court, please, can you please give us an order for the presumption of death? The court can still say no, because the time limit of the missing person or the duration of the missing person doesn't necessarily grant the automatic rights. It can still be 50 years, and then the court will say no, because they look at the balance of probabilities to say Thabang is more alive than dead. So you have to prove, because you want to benefit, that Thabang is more dead than alive. So the length or the duration of the missing person, it does not have any influence as to when, if the court will give the order of the presumption of death. So each case is judged on its merits in order to determine the likelihood of the missing person being dead. So the circumstances that will be considered by the court for an order of presumption of death will include the circumstances under which the person has disappeared. If you are taking notes, I will repeat that. Number one is the circumstances under which the missing person has disappeared. In this regard, the court considers whether the circumstances under which the missing person was last seen are of such a nature that it appears more probable that the missing person is dead than alive. So it is the circumstances under which the person has disappeared. And then number 2, it is the period of time that the person has been missing. So, like I said previously, that a long absence is itself not necessarily sufficient for the court to order a presumption of death, but it is important to consider, and it can, in certain circumstances, be a decisive factor. But you must know that there are some cases in which the courts were not prepared to make such orders, where a person has been missing for a period of longer than 30 years, and then sometimes the court can grant the presumptions of death, even somebody who has been missing for only for a few months. So obviously, this will be the situation in circumstances in which the probability of death is very high. The other factor is the age of a missing person. I would consider age a very important factor, because if the person was 75, I not say 75, 75 are pretty, is still strong and working, whatever. Let's say if the person is 80 years old, yeah, 80 sounds old. If the person is 80 years old, I think the court will be more inclined to grant the order of the presumption of death than the court granting a presumption of death for a 27-year-old tabang and be like, we're just gonna grant it anyway. I think it will be more difficult for them to grant a presumption of order for a younger person than for an older person. So age will be one of the most important factors. And then lastly, it will be the health of a missing person. Let's say the missing person was not in good health at the time that they disappear. I personally, this is my personal opinion, I do believe that the court will more readily grant such an order, because if let's say the person was diabetic, I don't know, I don't want to be judgmental. Let's say the person was those people that use maybe those people that use that thing to breathalyzer, or they use insulin or something like that. So I feel like the court will be more inclined to grant the presumption of death. If a person had like bad health, they would know that this person is not likely to survive out there without their medication, something like that. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before we move on to the consequences of an order of presumption of death? Okay, so no questions. So once again, let me emphasize on this, because a lot of people might get confused, that by granting the order of presumption of death, it does not mean that the missing person is dead. And it does not mean that the court is saying the missing person is dead. It's still a presumption, even if they've granted it, it's still a presumption. And this comes with consequences. So the court order is, it creates a rebuttable presumption, even if people have proof, they don't have to prove that the person is dead, but they just need to prove that the person is more dead than alive. So sometimes in South Africa, most courts, they are very reluctant to grant the presumption of the order of presumption of death, because sometimes people emerge and they come back alive, and then there is consequences for that. So the consequences of for an order of presumption of death is that one of the serious consequences is that, okay, so now, what name am I gonna use now? Let's say now, Faith, I included Faith in my will, and then she has gone now and she has applied for the presumption of death, the order of presumption of death, and then they granted it. And then Tabang is very rich. He has millions and millions of rents, or he has, let's say, I have a multi-million-dollar house. And then now Faith is the beneficiary of that house. And then they have granted the presumption of order. So the first consequence is that my deceased estate will be divided between everybody who is supposed to inherit. Or if there is money, it's going to be divided. However, there's a catch. So anybody who is bound to inherit from my estate, they have to give a security deposit. So I call it a security deposit. In Latin, they call it a cautio. Let me type this down. Cautio di restituendo. I like restituendo. I like to use Latin terms because they, especially on campus, because they make me sound smart. Restituendo. People like to use Latin words because they think they sound smarter. But anyway, that's a story for another day. So you have to, if you are to benefit from the missing person's inheritance, and then you have the order of presumption of death, then you have to pay a security deposit. There's a question. What happens in the case where 3 people are set to benefit from the estate of the missing person, but none of them have surety to commit should it happen that the person returns? Then they don't get anything. They have to put in that deposit, and then they can benefit. So if they don't have money, let's say it's for a house, and then the court does believe that that house is worth 3 million rent, then they have to put down that 3 million rent, that should it happen that Tabang emerges 10 or 15 years later, he can either get his house if it's in good condition, or he can get that money so that he can have a place to live. So if they don't have that security, then they cannot inherit. So I hope that is clear. The second consequences is that the life, if there was any life policies of the missing persons, those life policies are paid out to the beneficiaries on the very same condition that cautio di restituendo is provided. So whatever it is that those people stand to inherit, is there any time period to pay the security deposit? It is not clear. I am not sure. I might have to ask, but it is not clear whether there is a time period. I would assume that you need to have that security handy. So let's say, for example, you wanted to get let's say you wanted to get money now from my inheritance, and then you didn't have the money. So I don't think it's only limited to cash. I think you can also use like some assets. If you have a house, and then you can put in your house as collateral. Obviously, if that person emerges a few years later, then they can obviously take your house or something. So that is a very good question, Sana. So the estate gets lost indefinitely? Possibly, yes, because if the person doesn't emerge and then you have paid a deposit, maybe the state wins. I'm not sure. I might have to ask about that too. But it's more likely on the textbook that I'm using, it is not clear. And when I did this module, we didn't get any answers to that. So the third consequence is that if Tabang was married at the time that Tabang went missing, and then now the person that Tabang was married to now has this order of presumption of death, he can take that order of presumption of death, he can take it to court and apply for the dissolution of marriage on the Presumption of Death Act. So this is another one of the biggest consequences, because that order will dissolve the marriage from the date determined by the court. And then once the marriage is dissolved, even if that person comes back, they will no longer be married. So you will see now that this goes vice versa. With regards to their estate, the people that get to inherit, they have to put in a deposit so that when the person finally decides to come back, then they will be able to maybe get whatever deposit that was paid, and then they can probably return to life. Or if they had a house or something, they can take back their house and return to life. But with the issue of marriage, they cannot get their wife or their husband back. So that is very important to note, that the dissolution of marriages on the Presumption of Death Act is that the marriage is for all purposes deemed to have been dissolved by death, which is a little bit confusing, because when they say the marriage has been dissolved by death, and when it comes to the deceased estate, they say, the court will say, this order is just to presume that this person is dead. There are chances that this person is alive, but when it comes to marriage, the marriage will be deemed to have been dissolved by death. It's an answer that I do not have, but that is what the law says. So one of the most important things, this is the last part of this section. So just to give a highlight, one of the most important things that you need to take from this session is that if a court issues that order for the presumption of death, it does not mean that the court is saying that the person is dead. The court is only saying that the person is presumed to be dead. It also means that the person who is bound to benefit from the deceased estate or from the missing person's estate is the one that has to prove on the balance of probabilities that the person is more dead than they're alive. And you also need to note the consequences of death by the operation of law, which is the deceased marriage will be dissolved, their policies or life of the I jumped to the consequences of death, sorry. So the consequences of death, it's the deceased marriage is dissolved, policies on the life of the deceased are paid out, the deceased no longer holds any office, the deceased is no longer taxable, criminal actions, they fall off, private law actions for compensation, they fall off. And then we also spoke about that the natural person's legal subjectivity is terminated by his or her death. We spoke about somatic death, which occurs when the brain permanently ceases to function. What else did we speak about? We've spoken about the consequences, missing persons, and that if anyone is bound to benefit, they are the one that need to prove on a balance of probabilities that are more dead than alive. We spoke about the factors considered by the court that included the circumstances under which the person has disappeared, the period of time that the person has been missing, the age of the missing person. I gave an example of an 85-year-old man, and also that the court is more inclined to grant the order of the presumption of death when a person is at least older. And then we spoke about the health of a missing person and used the examples of somebody using insulin or somebody using those breathalyzers than a person who got missing when they were in good health. And then we spoke about the consequences, which included the deceased estate being shared accordingly, however, with the condition of the quotio restituendo. And then the second consequences was that if there's any life policies of the missing persons, those policies are paid out to the beneficiaries on the very same condition of the quotio restituendo. And then the third consequence was in relation to the marriage of the missing person being dissolved on the dissolution of marriages on presumption of death, and that the marriage is for all purposes deemed to have been dissolved by death. So this brings us to the end of today's session. Would like to thank you guys for joining me this evening. And if you have any questions, we still have 6 minutes to spare. If you do not have any questions right now, but the questions will come a little bit later, you are more than welcome to inbox me, to send me an email, or to send a message through to the group. Mark Farrow, you have raised your hand. You can unmute. Mark, the floor is yours. Is Mark there? Okay, I would assume that maybe it was an old hand that I probably didn't see, or it was a mistake. Okay, anybody with a question, ladies and gentlemen? We've got 4 minutes and 58 seconds and counting. I would assume that there is no questions. Mark's hand is still raised. So Mark, if you don't have any questions, it is okay. If you want to ask the question later, it's still okay with me. I really have to fix my schedule. I know that the timetable, I'm not really following the timetable, but we will meet again tomorrow, same time, to those for those that are doing family law. And then on Thursday, we will do introduction to South African law. And then to those of you that are doing labor law, I am going to fit it in on Friday night. If I didn't do so Friday, I will do so on Saturday evening. So I will communicate with you guys. And thank you very much for joining me tonight. Have a lovely evening. And goodbye. Oh, you guys still want to chat? We've got 3 minutes. I will just stop the recording. So long. I don't even know if you guys can hear me.